Hi everybody, welcome to WhyBuy. Today we're going to talk about the Xbox, and that includes the original Microsoft Xbox all the way to the current generation, which is the Series S and X. So my introduction to gaming started when I was really young. I really wanted a Super Nintendo, and when me and my brother got one for Christmas one year, we were super excited. We played Mario and Mario Kart and just had a lot of fun with that system. And back then, it was always kind of thought of that games were for kids. So fast forward to when I got a little bit older, and PlayStation was now the console. Nintendo was still around, and Sega was kind of not there anymore, but Sony and PlayStation, they were dominating the market, especially for adult or mature tiered games. It wasn't a kid's thing to do anymore, play video games. I remember my uncle had a Sony PlayStation, and the game he played was Resident Evil. So it wasn't so much about how adult video games were finally being produced, it was that they were finally being produced for consoles. And because of this sort of transformation of your console gaming, I wanted a PlayStation so bad. And I asked my grandparents, they were going to the States, and they said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I want a PlayStation. I want this new gaming console." And of course, you know, they're your grandparents, they're gonna do whatever they can to make you happy. And they came back with a Sega Saturn. The games it came with were Virtua Fighter, Daytona USA, and another one that I don't even remember. And so those games were not good. I played Daytona USA. They had, just not my style of game. You could do a race where you do 800 laps in a circle. So here I was playing these arcadey style games on the Sega Saturn and not really playing the games I wanted. So it kind of became a secondary hobby until the Xbox.
It is truly the future of video games, and I'm very excited to simply be a part of it if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
So as you know, Microsoft was focusing on their software and making PC games. They weren't in the console market. So it came as a surprise when they announced the Xbox, and it kind of seemed like they were going to be competing directly with PlayStation. So here's this new player in the home console space, and honestly, I couldn't care less. I wasn't a huge gamer at the time, and everyone had a PS2, so that's what I wanted. But I remember specifically the moment when I thought, I need an Xbox. And that moment was when I saw Halo. So what really set Halo apart from all the other games at the time, despite its massive scale and its graphics, was its multiplayer. Prior to that, the big draw of most games was their single-player campaigns. It's what you spent most of the time playing. And don't get me wrong, Halo's got a great campaign, and you can play it with friends, so that's pretty cool too. But you ended up spending most of your time playing multiplayer with people. Everybody would bring their consoles over, you connect to the local area, and you can play on different TVs. And eventually what that led to was Xbox Live and online play. What we take for granted today is our ability to connect with our friends and play online, but at that time, it just was unheard of. So when Xbox allowed you to do that with a game like Halo, it really set the bar high and really, at the end of the day, changed the industry. Despite Xbox being new to the market and not having the same clout that Sony had with PlayStation, it was really Halo that made the Xbox seriously competitive to the other consoles at the time. So one of the features that really stood out for me on the original Xbox was the ability to add MP3s to the hard drive on it. I used to play a ton of GTA, and I thought it was so cool that when you're cycling through the radio stations when you're driving your car, you can go to predetermined playlists that you loaded and actually listen to your own music. But it wasn't all great. You know, Microsoft had great games, powerful console, but they did have a couple of issues. And one of the main ones was the Duke. This controller is absolutely massive. Most people, let's say kids especially, couldn't even hold this thing and get their fingers to where you need to. First of all, there's only one trigger on each side. There's no bumper buttons. Instead, those are mapped to the black and white buttons that you need a sixth finger to reach. Even Microsoft admitted that it was a big snafu, and they almost alienated a lot of gamers because it hurt hands to hold this thing. It might be one of the worst controllers ever made. But luckily, they reduced the size. They moved some of the buttons as well to make it a little bit more friendly for gamers. And it's just an overall better, smaller design that's more accessible. So let's talk about some of the games. Obviously, Halo was the big seller, but one game that I really liked that was actually originally a PC game, but the sequel came out on consoles, which is really cool, was Half-Life 2. Now, Half-Life is, to this day, one of my favorite shooters. Because Xbox came out a few years after the PlayStation 2, it did have some advances in terms of its hardware specs. It's nothing that I could recite to you, but you do notice it when you play some of the games. And I remember specifically when playing Grand Theft Auto Vice City. The processing power was far greater and the load times were almost non-existent when traveling from one section of the map to the other. The generation leading up to the 360 lasted about 6 to 7 years. The PlayStation released in the late 90s, so in 2005 it was time for a new console. And Xbox 360 was the only one releasing that year. So I wouldn't say that any of the launch titles for the Xbox 360 were all that memorable. I think you had Perfect Dark Zero, Need for Speed Most Wanted. Like, these aren't console sellers in my mind. But what really set it apart was the fact that it was releasing a year earlier than the PlayStation 3. So the thing that probably stood out for me the most from the original Xbox to the Xbox 360 was the upgrade of the controller. The Duke was huge. It only had the 2 triggers in the back, and this is when the Xbox developed kind of a more PlayStation type controller, which I think has always been cutting edge in terms of controllers, PlayStation. So they added the bumper buttons and to the triggers. So now you can really utilize the whole controller. There's not a lot of wasted space or unnecessary face buttons here. They moved it to make it more accessible to more gamers. So as you know, the 360 rocketed out of the gate. Not only did it come out a year earlier and have better games, but it was also substantially cheaper than the PlayStation 3. Not only was it competing with the PlayStation 3, but it was actually outpacing it. So my original 360 got the red ring of death. And for those of you who don't know, it's a red blinking light on the face of your console that just basically means to me and to most gamers out there that it just isn't gonna work. And what you would do at that point is you would send your console in and they would either fix it or send you back a refurbished one. The red ring of death was heartbreaking for gamers. Here you just bought a brand new console and after a year or two, or sometimes even less, it just stopped working. And at the time when I did it, they were going through a switch of, you know, within the same generation to a newer looking type of console. So I didn't get a refurbished white one back. I actually got a black console. So it was kind of cool. I almost got an upgrade for the warranty process. So at the end of the day, no matter what hardware specs you have, what really sells the consoles is the games. If you have a game on one system that you really want to play, chances are you're gonna buy that system because that's the only way to play the game. One of the games that really stood out to me when I saw the first trailer was Gears of War.
So this was a cover-based shooter, and one thing that was really cool, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen in a game, was the active reload. So when you reload your gun, you have to hit it at the right point to get a quicker reload with sometimes more powerful ammunition. The game has spawned 4 other, like I think there's Gears of War 5, I think they're even making a 6th. I think it's been a pretty popular franchise for Microsoft.
When I started to see gameplay for this game, all I wanted to do was use that chainsaw gun. You know, not only could you shoot people with it, but you could also saw them in half. It was like the coolest thing ever. And I have a friend who actually went out and bought a 360 just for Left 4 Dead.
Left 4 Dead was made by Valve, and it's best played 4-player cooperatively. Since it's made by Valve, Counter-Strike was also made by Valve, so the control feels a lot the same, the gunplay feels a lot the same. You gotta make it through levels with your teammates, and at the end of the level, there's some big extraction, and there's a lot of enemies at that point. It could be said that this may have even inspired the Call of Duty Zombies, which has become very popular throughout the years.
But what got everybody really excited for the 360 was Halo 3. And Halo 3 really improved upon what made the first two games so great. A lot of people lost faith in Microsoft due to the Red Ring of Death on the 360. But I really respect how they handled it. They extended the warranty on the 360s to include the Red Ring of Death, and they gave you either a refurbished or a new console in replacement of that. But what this did was really level out the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox. Now PlayStation and Xbox were neck and neck. The 360 and the PS3 made headlines, and now everyone was watching for the release of the new generation. Millions of gamers were anticipating the reveals of the new consoles. What features were they going to have? What exclusives? Who was going to come out swinging, and who was going to win this generation? Unfortunately, Microsoft did not do a good job of showing off what gamers wanted to see. By putting their emphasis on TV instead of the games, the E3 reveal was a total disaster. This console not only needed to be connected to the internet at all times, but you also couldn't share games, and you needed to buy it with the Kinect attachment, which was like an extra $150.
Like the Kinect it was a flop. It was kind of cool. Like you even see on the ads, like some woman like changing the channels on her TV by going like this. You know what's a lot easier is going like this.
So with a 360, I was okay with buying a Wi-Fi attachment or an external hard drive to house more games, because those were choices and add-ons. But what I really didn't like was that Microsoft forced me to buy this. What the Kinect was really doing was cashing in on all this motion capture that was in games from the Wii and PlayStation Move, and essentially you are the controller. But what they thought was the future of games was just kind of a silly add-on that no hardcore gamer even really cared about. And the next day, during the PlayStation 4 reveal, it really seemed like the roles had reversed. PlayStation focused on the games, the console, and they even poked fun at Microsoft for the inability to share games. Although many people didn't like how the Xbox One was announced with its TV integration, I was a big fan of this. Today it's commonplace to have an all-in-one box, but at the time, this was cutting edge. Even the 360 was the first console to have the Netflix app. So let's talk about the games. The game that stood out most to me was Titanfall. It was very interesting to see the integration of mech suits with just a standard first-person shooter. The problem with Titanfall is that it's multiplayer only, which is fine on release, but the problem is that if the servers ever shut down, which they have for this game, you essentially can't play it anymore. To me, what Xbox has always lacked is powerful exclusive titles. You know, PlayStation has the big blockbusters. They have Uncharted, they have God of War, they have Killzone. But Xbox hasn't really had any franchises like that other than Halo and Gears of War. So what I like that they did within the Xbox One life cycle is invest a lot in indie games.
Well, Cuphead and his pal Bugman, they like to roll the dice.
One of the indie games that defines this is Cuphead. Cuphead is a side-scrolling shooter with the most unique art style you see in video games. Despite Cuphead being a timed exclusive, I was able to play it on its release because I owned an Xbox One. Probably the most significant thing to come out of this generation is Microsoft's introduction of Game Pass. Xbox Game Pass, like Netflix, is a monthly subscription service that allows you to play hundreds of games. Although some of the games on Game Pass are only available for a limited time, the great thing about it is that it gives you access to all of them. You can try a game out, and if you don't like it, all it does is take up hard drive space. As a serious gamer, I wish I could afford to buy every single game, just to try them out. And with Game Pass, it gives you the option to actually test them out before you purchase.
Now, I'm a big Spelunky 2 fan, and it was just released on the Xbox. So, let's check it out. So all I have to do is find it on the list, hit the button, and choose install. This is a small game, so it won't take very long to download. Obviously, some games are a little bit bigger, so it can take long. It just basically depends on your internet speed.
I don't know if Game Pass was a reaction to how poorly the Xbox One life cycle started, but I think they won back a lot of their fans. So another thing I wanted to point out is the controller. Ergonomically, there's a lot of improvements. Just from holding it, I mean, you don't get obstructed by the battery pack like you used to. As you can see, it's flat on the back. The buttons are responsive, the joysticks are still tight, and the triggers have a good spring back to them. So let's recap. Xbox comes out with Halo and makes a name for itself. 360 gets a good start, but then gets blown away by the red ring of death and loses a lot of fans. Then Xbox One, through its life cycle, starts to gain some fans back with Game Pass. And here we go again. You have Microsoft, you have Sony, and you have a new generation of consoles. After the reveal of the Xbox Series X and S, the Xbox's naming has been off since the original Microsoft Xbox. You have the 360, then you have the One, then you have the upgraded version, the One X, and now we're having Series S and X, both a next generation console. It is extremely confusing for anyone who's going out to buy these, who maybe it doesn't know these things like to a T. I really feel like it was just more of the same. There wasn't really anything revolutionary about those consoles' reveals. Microsoft was buying more studios and producing more games and adding more to Game Pass, but there was nothing really cutting edge about it. It was more of the same. I could still use my Xbox One to play all those titles. Everything was completely backwards compatible and available on the old system. Because of this, I really didn't feel like I needed to buy one. The decision was made easy by the fact that most of my friends decided they were going with PlayStation, and I didn't want to be playing online games by myself or with random people. As you can see, I do have an Xbox Series S, and here's why I think it's a perfect pairing to go with the PS5. The PlayStation 5 has some next-gen features that I feel I couldn't live without. But with the Series S, I can still play all of the games on Game Pass, including all day one releases from Xbox Studio games. Although the Series S has no disk drive and less technical capabilities than the Series X, it still gives me the ability to play all the games on Game Pass that I'd like to try.
So one thing to note as well is that Xbox has teamed up with EA, and so EA Access is also kind of another paid subscription to play their library of games. So now Xbox, since they teamed up with them, it's actually included in Game Pass. So this is the Xbox One controller, and this is an Xbox Series S controller. As you can see, they look exactly the same. So when I got the Series S, I wanted something that was going to be a little bit different. So I picked up the Xbox Elite 2. And first of all, this controller comes in a really nice case. It's just a gorgeous looking controller. The grips feel really nice, and it's even got some back paddles on it as well. And it's super responsive. You can actually map all your different buttons for different games depending on how you want your controller set up. And you can also just remove joysticks really easily, add in a taller one here. You can change the D-pad to something like this. These things are awesome and really give you a leg up in the competitive gaming space.
Personally, I think this is a great secondary console to have if you're a hardcore gamer. The console itself is cheaper, you still have access to all the Game Pass games, and it's available. One thing with this current generation of gaming is that you can't just go out and buy a PlayStation 5. You can't just go out and buy a Series X. But at this point, the Series S is readily available in most stores. So we're in an uncertain time right now, and we're starting to see new strategies. The big one, Microsoft buys Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. The winner of this console generation, in my mind, is still yet to be decided. And all gamers are left wondering, what are they going to do with the titles? Is Call of Duty going to be Xbox exclusive in a couple of years, or is it going to be multi-platform? Microsoft has always been weaker than PlayStation in its exclusives. So looking back at Xbox, everyone thought Microsoft was kind of crazy to get into the gaming market, but they have succeeded, and now they're one of the major players in the industry. And I think the future looks even brighter with the acquisitions they've made and the things they're doing to kind of build their player base. So if you thought this video was helpful, please like and subscribe, show your support, and thanks for watching. I don't know, like, do your consoles, like, if you think about PlayStation 1 was super tiny, actually, right? Wasn't it? I remember it being like that big. PlayStation 2 was massive. 3 was really big. And then 4 was small. Man, they're like, I guess they have to fit more hardware in these things, right? But, like, I guess the same can be said about the Xbox. It's humongous, decent, humongous, small. It's all over the place. But look at this controller, though. This has gotten better. Look at this thing. Boat anchor. For Super Mario Brothers, there was... Ugh. I couldn't think of another Super Nintendo game.
PlayStation's better.
PlayStation, although it was a great game still on
know,
PlayStation, it's on your PlayStation. Let's not turn this into console wars. The thing about Xbox is that it sucks. Really cool at the time was that you could actually turn the console off from the controller. That's the first memory I have of hearing about the 360 was someone's like, you don't even have to get up. He's a fat guy. So now it's time for the new console reveals yet again. And here we go again. If I didn't own an Xbox One on day one. So I think the naming convention is stupid.
Series, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Game this, Xbox Series what? Xbox One X? I'm tired. That's the Xbox.
Yeah.
From A to X. And then Series X. The hardest part about talking about it was knowing what the hell I was talking about. Like, the way they've done this whole naming convention from the start was just insanity. You don't call your third console the One. You know? It just, what?
Although PlayStation's a better console in any way. Listen, I'm getting to that. I have a PS5. I don't have an Xbox Series X, okay? Guy over here.
Buying games is expensive. No, that was your fault. That was your fault. I had it that time.
I'm sorry.
Oh, hello there. Buying games is expensive. It does seem like that, right? Like, oh, hi. Have you ever wanted to be a hefty, heavy, grumpy old man?
The thing about the PlayStation is it's really, truly, kind of, sort of, garbage.
180 twist. This is why Game Pass exists. It's so that you don't buy this game. You know, it just wasn't for me. I understand how some people might be really into that, but not me. Yeah. No thanks. No, I prefer a controller, and I think most gamers did, and that's why the Kinect failed, because everybody prefers to do this. It's like, would you rather play VR or just play a game console? For me, I'd rather play a game console. And I think that's what Kinect was trying to do, is like enter a weird sort of home VR space, and it just didn't pan out. What are they going to call the next generation of consoles? Me on pins and needles for 5 years. The next 5 years, I'll be wondering. Like, what do you think?
I think they're going to go back to Xbox.
Well, maybe, hopefully it's called the Xbox 2, because that makes sense. There was the Xbox, and then another Xbox, and then the Xbox One, and then another Xbox, and then the Xbox 2.
You lost me.